The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was fitting because Tuesdays had always been Elira Crow's worst days. She stood in the back room of Madame Hollister's dress shop, her fingers still bleeding from where she'd ripped through the last hem too quickly, and stared at the envelope like it might contain a warrant. It probably did, in its own way. An arrangement. A contract. A one-way ticket to a place so remote it didn't even have a proper name on the maps. Just coordinates and a warning scrawled in margins. Elevation hostile. Winter unforgiving. You going to open it or just bleed on it? Madame Hollister's voice cut through the dusty afternoon light. Elira's jaw tightened. She'd been bleeding on things for months now. Her reputation, her future, every chance she'd ever had at a normal life. All because Marcus Reinhardt couldn't handle being told no, and the courts couldn't handle believing a seamstress over a banker's son. I'm thinking, she said. Well, think faster. You've got until Friday before the magistrate's office sends someone around again. The magistrate. Right. The polite word for the men who'd already decided she was guilty of crimes she'd never committed. Theft, seduction, fraud. The unholy trinity of accusations that stuck to women like tar and never washed off. Marcus had seen to that when she'd rejected his advances. He'd methodically destroyed everything, her name, her work, her standing. And when she'd tried to fight back with the truth, she'd learned exactly how much truth was worth when you had no money and no family name to stand behind it. She opened the envelope. The handwriting was blunt, efficient. No flourishes. No pretense of romance. Miss Crow, I am a trapper, 42, working land in the Faro Range. I need a wife for practical reasons. Cooking, basic medical knowledge. Someone who won't die in winter. I offer shelter, protection, and legal marriage. I don't offer affection or promises beyond survival. If you can work hard, keep quiet about the past, and handle isolation, respond within 2 weeks. The journey takes 3 days by coach, 1 day by mule. Most women turn back. If you're still reading this, you might be different. R. Vex. Charming, Elira muttered, but her hands weren't shaking anymore. She read it again. Keep quiet about the past. That line sat heavy in her chest, equal parts threat and promise. He wasn't asking about her history. He wasn't demanding references or character witnesses. He was offering something rare in her world right now, the chance to disappear. What's it say? Madame Hollister leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. It says I have 2 weeks to decide if I want to freeze to death in the mountains or hang for crimes I didn't commit in the city. Sounds like an easy choice to me. Elira looked up sharply. The older woman's face was unreadable. She'd been kind enough to keep Elira working these past months, but kindness had limits. The shop's reputation was suffering by association. They both knew it. You think I should go? I think you're out of options, girl. And I think sitting here waiting for Marcus to fabricate another charge isn't going to end well. Madame Hollister pulled a small purse from her apron. 3 months' wages. Take it. Consider it severance, or an investment in you not being here when the bailiffs come knocking again. The money hit the table between them. Elira stared at it. Pride said to refuse, survival said to take it and run. Survival won. I'll write him back tonight, she said quietly. Good. Madame Hollister turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Elira, you're a better seamstress than half the girls in this city, and a better person than most. What happened to you wasn't fair, but fair doesn't keep you alive. The door clicked shut. Elira sat alone with the letter, the money, and the growing realization that she was about to trade one kind of trap for another. But at least this trap came with mountains. 300 miles north, Rowan Vex was setting his own traps, the steel kind that snapped bone. He moved through the tree line with the silence of a man who'd learned long ago that noise got you killed. The snow was fresh, about 6 inches, perfect for tracking. He'd spotted wolf prints earlier, circling too close to the cabin. Wolves meant competition. Competition meant less game. Less game meant a harder winter. He didn't have room for a harder winter. The trap clicked into place, buried under a thin layer of powder. He marked the spot with a cairn of stones only he would recognize, then straightened, scanning the slope above. The Faro Range stretched out like a broken jaw, all sharp peaks and dark valleys, beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. He'd been here 5 years now, long enough to stop counting days, long enough to forget what his own voice sounded like when he wasn't talking to himself, long enough to know this was killing him slowly. The loneliness wasn't poetic. It didn't ache in some romantic way. It was practical, brutal. Last winter he'd broken 2 ribs in a fall, and it had taken him 40 minutes to crawl back to the cabin. If he'd hit his head instead, they wouldn't have found his body until spring thaw. The wolves would have scattered his bones by then. That was the moment he'd decided to send the letter. Not because he wanted companionship. He'd given up on wanting things years ago. But because survival required pragmatism, and pragmatism meant admitting you couldn't do everything alone, no matter how much you wanted to believe otherwise. He pulled the folded response from his coat pocket. It had arrived yesterday via the supply runner, a grizzled old bastard named Calhoun who made the trip up the mountain once a month and charged triple for the privilege. Mr. Vex, I accept your terms. I can cook, clean wounds, and work without complaint. I have no family and no ties. I will arrive on the 17th via the northern route. I don't expect affection or romance. I expect honesty and safety. If you can provide those, we'll manage. E. Crow short, direct. No questions about the land or the weather or what kind of man he was. Either she was desperate or smart. Probably both. Rowan folded the letter back into his pocket and started the walk back to the cabin. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to make the place livable for another person, and to figure out what the hell he was supposed to say when she arrived. Fuck. The coach ride north was exactly as miserable as Alira had expected. 48 hours of rattling wheels, thin blankets, and the persistent smell of unwashed bodies packed too close together. She shared the cramped space with a merchant's wife returning from the capital, 2 miners heading for work camps, and a priest who kept eyeing her like he could smell the scandal. Maybe he could. By the second day, the landscape had shifted from rolling farmland to dense forest, and finally to the brutal inclines that marked the approach to the Faro Range. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. The other passengers bundled tighter into their coats. Alira wrapped her shawl, one of the few pieces she'd kept from her old work, and watched the world turn hostile outside the window. "You're headed to Coldwater Junction?" the merchant's wife asked, her tone hovering somewhere between pity and curiosity. Alira nodded. "Visiting family? Meeting my husband." The woman's eyebrows lifted. "You're married to someone up there?" "Will be soon." That shifted the dynamic in the coach. The priest leaned forward slightly. One of the miners smirked. "Mail order?" the merchant's wife asked, and there it was, the judgment wrapped in false sympathy. "Arrangement," Alira corrected. "Same as half the marriages in the capital, just more honest about it." The priest made a disapproving sound. Alira ignored him. "Well," the woman said carefully, "I hope you know what you're getting into. Coldwater's not civilized. The men up there are rough. The winters are brutal. And the law—" She paused. "The law doesn't reach that far very often." "Sounds perfect," Alira said flatly. The conversation died after that. When they finally reached Coldwater Junction 2 days later, Alira understood what the woman had meant. The town wasn't a town. It was a collection of buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles, connected by muddy paths and suspicious stairs. Maybe 300 people total, all of them looking like they'd been carved from the same hard granite as the peaks above. The coach deposited her in front of what passed for a general store, and the driver handed down her single trunk without ceremony. "Someone meeting you?" he asked. "Supposed to be." "Well, good luck with that." He climbed back up, and the coach rolled on toward the mining camps higher up the pass. Alira stood alone in the street, holding her trunk, as snow began to fall. She'd been there maybe 5 minutes when a voice spoke from behind her. "You Alira Crow?" She turned. The man standing there looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts, tall but asymmetrical, favoring his left leg slightly. His coat was patched in 3 places, and his face carried the kind of weathering that came from years of exposure. Not old exactly, just used up. "I'm Alira," she said. "You're not Rowan Vex." "Hell no, I'm Calhoun. I run supplies up to Vex's place. He sent me to fetch you." "He didn't come himself?" Calhoun snorted. "Vex doesn't come down to town unless he absolutely has to. Hasn't set foot in Coldwater in 8 months. Come on, we've got a 3-hour ride on mules, and I want to get you delivered before dark." Alira hesitated. Why doesn't he come to town? Because the town doesn't much like him, and he returns the favor. Now you coming or not? Because I'm not making this trip twice. She grabbed her trunk. The mule ride up the mountain was worse than the coach. Narrower paths, steeper drops. And Calhoun, who apparently viewed conversation as a moral failing, said nothing for the first hour. They climbed higher, the air thinning, until Elira's ears popped and her lungs burned with every breath. Finally, Calhoun spoke. You know what you're getting into with Vex? I know what he told me in the letter. That all? That's all I need. Calhoun was quiet for another minute. Then, he's not a bad man, but he's not an easy one either. Keeps to himself. Doesn't trust easy. Lost people in the war, whole unit from what I heard. Came up here to get away from all that, and the mountain obliged. Just don't expect warmth, expect work. Elira adjusted her grip on the reins. I'm not here for warmth. Good, because you won't find it. They crested a ridge, and the cabin came into view. It sat in a small clearing backed against a cliff face surrounded by dense pine. Smoke rose from the chimney. A single light burned in the window. It looked exactly like what it was. A shelter, not a home. Calhoun helped her down and hauled her trunk to the porch. I'll leave you to it, he said. Vex already paid me. Wait, you're not staying? Not my business to stay. Good luck, Miss Crow. He mounted his mule and disappeared back down the trail before she could respond. Elira stood alone on the porch, staring at the door. She'd come 300 miles, left behind everything, burned every bridge. There was no going back now. She knocked. The door opened. Rowan Vex stood in the threshold, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. He was taller than she'd expected, broad across the shoulders, but lean in a way that suggested hard winters and harder work. His hair was dark, shot through with gray at the temples. His eyes were the color of cold steel, and they studied her with the same detached assessment she'd used to evaluate fabric quality. You made it, he said finally. I did. Come in before you freeze. She stepped inside. The cabin was sparse. One main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a table, 2 chairs. A ladder led to what she assumed was a sleeping loft. Everything was functional, clean, and devoid of personality. Rowan closed the door behind her. We'll do the legal part tomorrow, he said. There's a circuit judge who comes through Coldwater once a month. He'll be there in the morning. After that, we come back here and you settle in. All right. I cleared space in the loft for your things. You take the loft, I'll take the floor down here. That's not necessary. It is, he said firmly. Until we're legally married, I'm not risking talk. And even after, I'm not assuming anything. We agreed this was practical, not romantic. I'm keeping it that way. Elira set her trunk down. Fine, but I'm not afraid of work, and I'm not fragile, so don't treat me like I am. His expression didn't change. Good, because up here, fragile things don't last. They stood in the small cabin, 2 strangers bound by desperation and a letter, and the fire crackled between them like the only honest thing in the room. The circuit judge was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but the kind of low-grade functional alcoholism that came from years of riding between frontier towns performing weddings, land disputes, and the occasional hanging. His name was Pharaoh, and he smelled like whiskey and old tobacco. You 2 sure about this? He asked, squinting at them across the desk in Coldwater's excuse for a municipal office. Yes, Rowan said. Pharaoh looked at Elira. And you, miss? You're entering this of your own free will? I am. You understand that once I sign this, it's legally binding? This isn't some frontier handshake. This is marriage under territorial law. I understand. Pharaoh shrugged and pulled out the certificate. All right then. Names. The ceremony took 4 minutes. No vows, no witnesses except Pharaoh's hungover clerk. Just signatures on paper and a stamp that echoed too loud in the small room. Congratulations, Pharaoh said without enthusiasm. You're married. That'll be $5. Rowan paid. They walked out into the cold morning, legally bound, and started the walk back to where Calhoun waited with the mules. Neither of them spoke until they were halfway up the mountain. Why did you really send for a wife? Elira asked suddenly. Rowan didn't look at her. I told you, practical reasons. There are other ways to get help. You could hire seasonal workers. You could partner with another trapper. Could. Don't want to. Why not? He was quiet for a long time. Then, because workers leave, partners betray you, and I needed someone who had as much reason to stay as I did to make them stay. Elira absorbed that. You think I'll stay because I have nowhere else to go. I think you'll stay because leaving means going back to whatever you were running from. Same reason I stay. Not love, not loyalty. Just the fact that every other option is worse. It should have stung. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in months. Fair enough, she said. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The first week was an education in survival. Rowan woke before dawn every day, checked his trap lines, and returned by mid-morning with whatever he'd caught. Rabbits, sometimes a fox, once a small deer. Elira learned to skin and clean the kills, to stretch the pelts, to waste nothing. Her hands, soft from years of needlework, cracked and bled. She wrapped them and kept working. She learned which wood burned best, how to bank a fire to last through the night, how to melt snow for water without wasting fuel. She learned to read the weather, the particular gray that meant snow within hours, the wind direction that signaled a storm rolling in from the North Pass. And she learned that Rowan Vex was a man built entirely from routine and silence. He spoke only when necessary. He moved through the cabin like a ghost, performing tasks with mechanical efficiency. He never touched her, never even stood too close. At night, he slept on a bedroll near the fire while she took the loft. And in the mornings, he was always already awake when she climbed down. It was like living with a stranger who'd forgotten how to be human. On the 8th day, she broke the silence. Do you ever talk just to talk? She asked over dinner. Venison stew, her third attempt, finally edible. Rowan looked up from his bowl. What? Conversation. Do you ever have it? Not much point. There's always a point. People aren't meant to live in complete silence. People aren't meant for a lot of things. Doesn't stop them from doing it. Elira set down her spoon. I'm not asking for poetry. I'm asking for basic human interaction. You've barely said 100 words to me since we got married. You want me to lie? Pretend we're something we're not? I want you to acknowledge that I exist. That landed. Rowan's jaw tightened, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or shame. Hard to tell. You exist, he said quietly. I know that. But I also know that attachment is dangerous, and affection is a liability. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm not learning it again. What happened? Nothing that concerns you. We're married. On paper. That doesn't entitle you to my past. Elira stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Fine. Keep your past, but don't expect me to live like a ghost in this cabin just because you are one. She climbed the ladder to the loft and didn't come down until morning. The cold came early that year. By mid-October, snow fell in heavy waves and the temperature plummeted. Rowan's trap lines froze over twice. Game grew scarce. The cabin, which had seemed adequate before, now felt fragile against the weight of winter pressing in from all sides. Elira worked harder than she ever had in her life. She reinforced windows with cloth scraps, patched holes in the roof, organized their supplies with ruthless efficiency. She made soap from animal fat, dried herbs she'd found in the summer growth, and rationed their food stores down to the ounce. And slowly, incrementally, Rowan began to trust her. It started small. He let her check his trap lines when his leg was bothering him. He asked her opinion on whether a storm was coming. He stopped sleeping with his knife within arm's reach. One night in late November, after a particularly brutal day battling wind and snow to secure the woodpile, they sat by the fire in exhausted silence. You did good today, Rowan said suddenly. Elira looked up, surprised. What? The woodpile. You did good. Most people would have quit halfway through. It was the first compliment he'd ever given her. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded and went back to staring at the fire. But something had shifted. The trouble started in December. Rowan had gone into town for supplies, his first trip down the mountain in months. Elira had stayed behind to manage the cabin. He'd promised to be back before dark. He returned 3 hours late, face grim, moving stiffly. What happened? Elira asked immediately. Nothing. Don't lie to me, you're hurt. I'm fine. She grabbed his arm and he flinched. She pulled back his sleeve. His forearm was bruised, knuckles split. Who did this? Rowan pulled away. Doesn't matter. It does to me. He turned on her then, sudden and sharp. Why? Why does it matter to you? We're not… He stopped himself. We're not what? Elira challenged. Not a real marriage? Not actually partners? You're the one who keeps saying this is practical, but you won't let me help when you're hurt, and you won't tell me when there's danger. That's not practical. That's stupid. Rowan exhaled hard, his breath clouding in the cold cabin air. There was an incident in town, he said finally. Some men. They've got problems with me, and now they've got problems with you. What kind of problems? The kind where they think you're here under false pretenses. The kind where they think I bought you, and you're not staying willingly. Elira went very still. What did you tell them? I told them the truth, that you're my wife and it's none of their business. They didn't like that answer. So they hit you. So we had a disagreement. A disagreement that left you bloody. Rowan met her eyes. I've had worse. And there in his face she saw it. The shadow of whatever war he'd fought before coming to these mountains. The weight of violence he'd seen and done. I can handle myself, he said quietly. But I need you to understand something. If they come here, if anyone comes here looking to cause trouble, you don't hesitate. You fight, you run, you do whatever you have to do to survive. Don't wait for me to save you. Don't trust that anyone will. I stopped trusting people to save me a long time ago, Elira said. He studied her for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Good. What? Winter deepened. The world outside became a hostile white expanse, broken only by the dark spine of the mountains and the occasional cry of wolves in the distance. Inside the cabin, Rowan and Elira developed a rhythm, not quite friendship, not quite partnership, but something functional and steady. She learned that he'd been a soldier, though he never said for which side or in which war. She learned that he had nightmares, thrashing, silent ones that left him awake and staring at nothing for hours afterward. She learned that he was meticulous about fairness, splitting every task and every resource exactly in half, as if afraid that anything less would make him a tyrant. He learned that she'd been accused of crimes she didn't commit. He learned that she had a sharp mind for numbers and organization. He learned that she didn't cry, didn't complain, and didn't break, even when the work was backbreaking and the cold was bone deep. They learned to read each other's silences. And when Christmas came, unmarked except by the date on Rowan's carefully maintained calendar, they shared a slightly larger dinner and pretended it was just another day. Do you miss it? Elira asked as they ate. Civilization? People? Whatever life you had before. Rowan considered the question. No. Do you? Parts of it. The work, sometimes. I was good at what I did. You're good at this too. She looked up, surprised. You are, he said, almost defensively. You've kept us alive. That's not nothing. We've kept us alive, she corrected. He almost smiled. Fair enough. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire burned steady. And for the first time since arriving, Elira thought that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. Not thrive, not be happy, but survive. It was enough. Muching. The real trouble came in January, delivered by a man on horseback who should have frozen to death making the climb. His name was Darrow, and he carried a federal warrant. Rowan saw him coming from a quarter-mile out and met him at the tree line, rifle in hand. That's far enough, Rowan said. Darrow reined in his horse. He was younger than Rowan, clean-shaven, with the kind of pressed uniform that meant he was either military or law enforcement, maybe both. Rowan Vex? Depends on who's asking. Marshal Darrow, Territorial Authority. I'm looking for a woman, Elira Crow. Records show she came through Coldwater Junction 2 months ago. Trail leads here. Rowan's grip on the rifle didn't waver. What's your business with her? She's wanted for theft and fraud in the capital. There's a warrant for her arrest. Show me. Darrow pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. Even from a distance, Rowan could see the official seals. That warrant's a lie, Rowan said flatly. That's for a court to decide. There is no court up here. Just you, me, and a lot of empty mountain. Darrow's hand moved toward his sidearm. Don't make this difficult, Vex. I'm authorized to bring her in. You interfere, you're obstructing federal law. Federal law doesn't reach this far, Rowan said, and you're on my land. The law reaches everywhere. Not here it doesn't. They stood in the snow, two armed men with competing versions of justice, and the temperature dropped another degree. I'm not leaving without her, Darrow said. Rowan raised the rifle slightly. Yeah, you are. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Elira stepped out onto the porch, and both men turned. She looked small against the mountains, wrapped in her shawl, but her voice carried clear and steady. Don't shoot him, Rowan. Get back inside, Rowan said without taking his eyes off Darrow. No. She walked forward, stopping beside Rowan. If he has a warrant, let him say his piece. Darrow's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe relief. Miss Crow, I'm here to— I know why you're here, Elira interrupted. Marcus Reinhardt sent you. Mr. Reinhardt filed the complaint, yes, along with sworn testimony from multiple witnesses. Witnesses he paid or threatened. The charges are false. Again, that's for a court to determine. I'm not going back, Elira said simply. Darrow's jaw tightened. Then I'll have to compel you. Rowan stepped forward, putting himself between them. You'll have to go through me first. Rowan? Elira started. No. His voice was hard. This is done. She's not going anywhere. You want to try taking her, Marshal? You go ahead, but you won't make it off this mountain. Darrow looked between them, this strange, hard man and the woman who'd walked out to face a warrant rather than hide. And something in his expression changed. I'll be back, he said finally. With more men, if I have to. This isn't over. Yes, Rowan said quietly. It is. Darrow turned his horse and rode back down the trail. Elira and Rowan stood in the snow, watching him disappear. You shouldn't have done that, Elira said. Probably not. They'll come back. I know. Why did you do it? Rowan looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his face had changed too. Because running from the past only works if you've got somewhere worth running to, he said. And this is it. This is what we've got. I'm not letting them take it. Elira's throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned back toward the cabin. Come on, we've got work to do. They walked back together through the snow, two people who'd made a transaction and found something harder to name, and the mountains kept their secrets as they always had. The storm that had been building finally broke that night, and the world turned white. The storm lasted 3 days. Snow piled against the cabin walls until the windows were half buried, and the world outside became nothing but white noise and howling wind. Rowan and Elira worked in shifts, one sleeping while the other kept the fire going, checked for roof damage, made sure the chimney didn't block with ice. They barely spoke. There wasn't time for conversation when survival took every ounce of focus. On the 4th morning, the wind finally died. Rowan dug out the door while Elira made coffee from their dwindling supply. When he came back inside, his face was raw from cold, ice crystals caught in his beard. How bad? She asked, handing him a cup. Bad enough. Lost the lean-to on the east side. Woodpile's intact, but I'll need to clear a path to the trap lines. Could take days. I'll help. He didn't argue. They'd moved past that. They worked until their hands went numb, shoveling snow, reinforcing what the storm had damaged, checking every corner of their small territory for structural failures. By nightfall, they'd cleared enough to function, but the real damage was deeper. Supplies that should have lasted another month were stretched thin, and the trap lines they'd counted on were buried under 4 feet of powder. That night, sitting by the fire with bowls of thin soup, Elira asked the question that had been building since Darrow rode away. What do we do when he comes back? Rowan stared into his bowl. Depends on what he brings with him. You think he'll bring help? If he's smart, he will. If he's stupid, he'll come alone and try to prove something. And if he brings help, then we have a problem. Elira set down her soup. I won't let you die for me. You understand that? If it comes to a choice between your life and me going back to face those charges, it won't come to that. You can't know that. Rowan looked up, his eyes sharp. Yes, I can. Because I've been in situations where the choices were fight or die, and I chose fight every single time. I'm still here. Man, that means something. It means you got lucky. Maybe. Or maybe it means I'm better at surviving than people give me credit for. He paused. And you're not going back. We agreed. This is practical. Well, practically speaking, losing you means I lose the only person who knows how to keep this place running when I'm out on the lines. That's not acceptable. It was the most mercenary reason he could have given, and they both knew it was a lie. Elira felt something crack open in her chest. Not love, not yet, but recognition. This hard, damaged man had drawn a line in the snow, and he wasn't moving. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once and went back to his soup. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The town made its position clear 2 weeks later. Rowan had gone down for emergency supplies: flour, salt, lamp oil, things they couldn't make or substitute. He'd planned to be in and out within an hour, avoiding conversation, avoiding trouble. He should have known better. The general store was empty except for the owner, a pinch-faced man named Greer, who'd never liked Rowan and made no secret of it. "Vex," Greer said, not looking up from his ledger. "Heard you had visitors." "Word travels," Rowan said flatly, setting his list on the counter. "Marshal Darrow's been asking questions. Says you're harboring a criminal. Says wrong." "That's not what the warrant says." Rowan leaned against the counter, his voice dropping. "Greer, I don't give a damn what the warrant says. The woman's my wife, legal and binding. Whatever she did or didn't do before she got here isn't my concern or yours. It's the law's concern. The law can take it up with me directly." Greer finally looked up, his expression cold. "You're making enemies, Vex. Town's already split on you. This doesn't help." "I'm not here to make friends." "No, you're here to live like a hermit and pretend the rest of us don't exist. But when you bring trouble down on Coldwater, when federal marshals start sniffing around, asking questions, disrupting business, that becomes our problem." Rowan straightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the town council met last night. We voted. If Darrow comes back with an order to bring her in, we're not standing in his way, and we're not hiding you." The air in the store went very still. "You do that," Rowan said quietly, "and you're signing her death warrant. Those charges are false. The man who filed them is a liar. And worse, she'll hang for crimes she didn't commit. That's for a court to decide." "There is no court. There's just power and money, and she's got neither. You know how this ends." Greer's jaw tightened. "I know that harboring fugitives makes this town a target. I know that your personal problems aren't worth risking federal occupation or losing trade routes. And I know that you've been nothing but trouble since you got here 5 years ago. Maybe it's time you moved on." Rowan's hands curled into fists on the counter. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he picked up his list, folded it, and put it back in his pocket. "Keep your supplies," he said. "We'll manage without them." He walked out into the cold street, his mind already calculating how long they could last on what they had, how far he'd need to travel to find another supply point, whether they'd survive until spring on rationed food and melted snow. He was halfway to where he'd tied his mule when a voice stopped him. "Vex." He turned. A woman stood in the doorway of the boarding house, older, maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back severe and a face that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. Her name was Nadine Kelter, and she ran the only decent establishment in Coldwater. "You need supplies," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'll manage." "Don't be stupid. Come inside." He hesitated, then followed her into the boarding house. She led him to a back room stacked with dry goods: flour, beans, salt, sugar, lamp oil, even coffee. More than he could have bought from Greer with a month's worth of pelts. "Why?" Rowan asked. Nadine started pulling items off the shelves, wrapping them in cloth. "Because Greer's an ass and the town council's scared. Because I've lived here 30 years and I've seen what happens when communities turn on their own out of fear. It never ends well." "You're risking your business." "My business is fine. Most people in this town aren't as spineless as Greer and his friends. They just don't speak up at council meetings." She handed him a wrapped parcel. "Your wife. She really innocent?" "Yes." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Nadine studied him for a long moment. "You've changed, Vex. When you first came here, you were half dead inside. Didn't care about anything or anyone. Now you're standing here ready to fight the whole damn territory for a woman you married for practical reasons." She smiled faintly. "Funny how that works." Rowan took the parcel. How much do I owe you? Nothing. Call it an investment in you two not starving to death before this mess gets sorted. I'll pay you back. I know you will. She handed him another bundle. There's medicine in there, too. Willow bark, iodine, bandages. You might need it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Things are going to get worse before they get better. Darrow's not the type to give up, and men like the one who filed those charges. They don't like losing. Be ready. Rowan loaded the supplies onto his mule, his mind already spinning through scenarios, backup plans, escape routes if it came to that. He rode back up the mountain under a sky that promised more snow, and when he reached the cabin, Illyra was waiting on the porch with his rifle. Trouble? She asked, lowering the gun. Not yet, but it's coming. They unloaded the supplies in silence, and that night Rowan showed her where he kept his spare weapons. A pistol, a knife, a second rifle he'd bought off a miner 3 years back and never used. If anyone comes while I'm out, he said, you don't hesitate. You don't ask questions. You defend yourself, and you run if you have to. Illyra picked up the pistol, checked the chamber with surprising competence. Where'd you think I'd run to? There's nowhere to go. There's always somewhere. Northridge has caves, old mining tunnels, places you could hide until I find you. And if you don't find me, I will. She met his eyes. You can't promise that. No, he admitted, but I can promise I'll try. That seemed to be enough. The weeks that followed were tense, measured in waiting and preparation. Rowan reinforced the cabin, barred the windows, built a secondary exit through the back wall disguised as a woodpile. He taught Illyra to shoot, to track, to read signs in the snow that meant someone was coming. She learned quickly, her hand steady on the rifle, her mind sharp when it came to tactical thinking. You've done this before, Rowan said one afternoon after she'd hit 3 targets in a row at 50 yards. My father taught me when I was young, before he died. You never mentioned him. You never asked. Fair point. They fell into a rhythm again, but different now. Less like strangers, more like soldiers preparing for a battle they couldn't avoid. They talked more, shared more. Small things at first. Illyra told him about her father, a tailor who'd believed in quality work and fair prices and died broke because of it. Rowan told her about the war, though he kept the worst parts locked away, only letting slip fragments, mud and blood, and the sound of men screaming in languages he didn't understand. Do you regret it? She asked one night. Fighting? I regret what it turned me into, he said. But not the fighting itself. Someone had to do it. That's a lonely way to live. I'm good at lonely. You were, she corrected. Past tense. He looked at her across the fire, and something in his chest shifted. A door opening that he'd kept locked for years. Yeah, he said quietly. I was. February came with brutal cold and clear skies. The trap lines were producing again, enough to keep them fed and give Rowan pelts to trade once the thaw came. Illyra had organized their supplies with military precision, rationing everything down to the day. They were surviving, even thriving in small ways. Then the letter arrived. Calhoun brought it up on his monthly run, looking grim. This came through official channels, he said, handing it to Rowan. Federal courier left it with the postmaster in Coldwater, figured you'd want to see it before anyone else did. Rowan opened it. The letterhead was Territorial Court, signed by a magistrate he'd never heard of. The language was formal, dense with legal terminology, but the message was clear. Illyra Crow was ordered to appear before a territorial judge in the capital within 30 days to face charges of theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Failure to appear would result in a warrant for immediate arrest and extradition by force. 30 days, Illyra said, reading over his shoulder. They can't enforce it, Rowan said. Not up here. They can if Darrow brings enough men. Calhoun cleared his throat. There's more. Darrow's been recruiting. Talked to some of the miners, offered them deputy commissions. Word is he's planning to come back with a full posse, 10, maybe 15 men. Rowan's jaw tightened. When? Spring thaw, soon as the pass is clear. Maybe 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Rowan looked at Illyra, saw the fear she was trying to hide, and made a decision. We're not running, he said. Rowan, I mean it. We're not running, and you're not going back. We're going to face this head on. How? Against 15 armed men? By telling the truth, loudly, in front of witnesses who can't be bought or threatened. Calhoun frowned. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we go down to Coldwater before Darrow gets here. We call a town meeting. We put everything on the record. What happened to Elira, who filed the charges, why they're false. We force the town to take a side. That's a risk, Calhoun said. Half that town would rather hand her over than deal with federal trouble. Maybe. But the other half might surprise you. Nadine Kelter helped us. There are others who aren't as scared as Greer and his counsel. If we can get them to speak up, to witness what's really happening, it makes it harder for Darrow to just grab her and leave. Elira shook her head. It's not enough. Even if the town supports us, Darrow has the law on his side. A federal warrant trumps local opinion. Not if we expose the warrant as fraudulent. Not if we prove that Marcus Reinhardt lied, bribed witnesses, falsified evidence. If we can get that on record, the warrant falls apart. And how do we prove that from 300 miles away? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, we don't. We make Reinhardt come to us. The plan was insane. Even Calhoun said so, and he'd seen a lot of insane things in his years running supplies through the mountains. You want to bait him? Calhoun said, incredulous. You want to draw the man who fabricated charges and ruined her life all the way out here to a town that barely tolerates you, and hope he'll somehow confess? No, Rowan said. I want to make him so angry, so desperate to save face that he makes a mistake. Men like Reinhardt, they're all ego. They can't stand being challenged publicly. If we spread the truth about what he did, if we make enough noise that it reaches back to the Capitol, he'll come. And when he does, he'll either defend himself or expose himself. Or he'll just pay more people to lie, Elira said quietly. Maybe. But here's the thing. Up here, money doesn't buy loyalty the way it does in the city. People survive on trust and reputation. If Reinhardt shows up throwing money around trying to buy testimony against you, the town will see it for what it is. You're betting everything on the moral integrity of a frontier town, Elira said. I'm betting on self-interest. The town doesn't want federal occupation. They don't want their trade routes disrupted. If they can resolve this locally, they will. And if Reinhardt looks like the problem instead of you, they'll side with us. It was a gamble, a huge, desperate gamble, but they were out of better options. How do we spread the story? Elira asked. Rowan looked at Calhoun. You run supplies to every mining camp and settlement within 50 miles. You hear everything, and everyone trusts you. If you started telling people the truth about what happened to Elira, about Reinhardt's lies, the false charges, word would spread fast. Calhoun rubbed his jaw. I'd be taking a side. You already did when you brought me those supplies from Nadine. That was different. That was helping a neighbor. This is defying a federal warrant. This is standing up for someone who can't stand up for herself, Rowan said. You've seen how this works. Men with money and power crush people like Elira every day, and everyone just looks the other way because it's easier. I'm asking you not to look away. Calhoun was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. You're going to get me killed, Vex. Is that a yes? It's a, I'll spread the word, but if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you at my own hanging. Rowan almost smiled. Fair enough. The campaign began quietly. Calhoun started telling the story, carefully, factually, to miners, traders, settlers. How a seamstress in the capital had rejected a powerful man's advances. How that man had fabricated charges, bought testimony, destroyed her reputation. How she'd fled to the frontier to escape being hanged for crimes she didn't commit. How her new husband was standing between her and a corrupt system that valued wealth over truth. The story spread like fire through dry timber. Within 2 weeks, half the settlements in the Faro Range had heard some version of it. Opinions split predictably. Some thought Elira was getting what she deserved, some thought the whole thing stank of corruption, most just wanted to avoid trouble. But the conversation was happening. That was the important part. Meanwhile, Rowan and Elira prepared for the worst. They stockpiled ammunition, reinforced the cabin further, mapped escape routes through the mountains. Rowan taught Elira everything he knew about survival, how to navigate by stars, how to start a fire in wet conditions, how to treat wounds in the field. If this goes bad, he said one night, if they take me and you get away, you head north. There's a trapper named Mackenzie about 40 miles up the ridge. He's solid. He'll help you. I'm not leaving you. You will if you have to. No, she said firmly. We survive together or not at all. That's the deal. He wanted to argue, but looking at her face, set, determined, fearless in a way that terrified him, he knew it would be pointless. "All right," he said. "Together." She nodded, satisfied. That night, for the first time since they'd married, Rowan came down from his bedroll and sat beside her by the fire. "I need to tell you something," he said. Elira looked up from the knife she'd been sharpening. "What?" "The reason I don't trust Easy. The reason I kept my distance." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I had a unit. During the war. 12 men. We fought together for 2 years, became brothers, the way soldiers do. And then we got ambushed. Bad intelligence, worse luck. I was the only one who made it out." Elira set down the knife. "I carried that for a long time," Rowan continued. "The guilt. The idea that I'd survived when better men hadn't. I came up here to get away from it, to stop caring about anything or anyone, because caring meant loss and I couldn't handle any more loss." "And then I showed up," Elira said quietly. "And then you showed up. And for 4 months I told myself this was just practical, just survival, that I wasn't getting attached, wasn't letting myself care." He met her eyes. "I was lying." The words hung in the air between them. "When Darrow showed up with that warrant," Rowan said, "when I stepped in front of you with that rifle, that wasn't about practicality. That was about the fact that somewhere along the way, you stopped being a transaction and started being someone I'd die for. And I need you to know that, before whatever's coming gets here." Elira's throat tightened. "Rowan, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were calloused, scarred from years of hard work and harder living. Hers were cracked and rough now, too. Nothing like the soft hands of a seamstress. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She smiled faintly. "For someone who claims to be bad at caring, you're pretty obvious about it." He laughed, a short, surprised sound. "I'll work on being more subtle." "Don't, I like you obvious." They sat by the fire, hands linked, and outside the wind carried the scent of coming spring. March arrived with thawing snow and the first signs of life returning to the mountains. And with it came word that Darrow was assembling his posse. Nadine sent a message via Calhoun, 15 men, all deputized, all armed. They'd be moving up the mountain within the week, and Marcus Reinhardt had indeed left the capital, headed for Coldwater according to a trader who'd passed him on the northern road. "He's coming," Elira said, reading the message. "Good," Rowan replied. "Let him come." They spent the next 3 days preparing Coldwater for what was essentially a trial. Rowan called in every favor he had, convinced Nadine to host the gathering at her boarding house, got Calhoun to invite every settler and miner within riding distance, even persuaded a few sympathetic townspeople to stand as witnesses. The goal was simple: create a public forum where the truth could be heard before Darrow could make his arrest. "You think people will show up?" Elira asked the night before. "Some will. Others won't. But enough will that it'll matter. And if Reinhardt doesn't take the bait, then we've lost nothing but time. And if he does?" Rowan checked his rifle, set it by the door. "Then we find out if people up here care more about justice or convenience." The morning they rode down to Coldwater, the sky was clear and cold. Nadine's boarding house was packed. Maybe 50 people crammed into the main room, standing room only. Miners, trappers, traders, townspeople. Some hostile, some curious, most just wary. Greer stood in the back with his arms crossed, his expression sour. The town council members clustered near the door, ready to bolt if things went sideways. And in the front, looking out of place in his pressed suit and polished boots, stood Marcus Reinhardt. Elira saw him and went very still. He was younger than Rowan expected, maybe 30, with the kind of smooth features that came from never missing a meal or working a hard day. His eyes found Elira across the room, and he smiled. It was a predator's smile. "Miss Crow," he said loudly, cutting through the murmur of conversation. "How lovely to see you again." Elira didn't respond. Darrow stood beside Reinhardt, his hand resting on his sidearm. Behind them, the posse waited, 15 men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Nadine stepped forward, her voice sharp. "This is a town meeting, not an arrest. Everyone keeps their weapons holstered, and everyone gets a chance to speak. That includes Miss Crow." Darrow frowned. "I have a federal warrant." Which you can execute after we've heard the facts, Nadine interrupted, unless you're afraid of what she might say. That got murmurs from the crowd. Darrow's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. Let her speak. Elira stepped forward, and Rowan moved to stand beside her. She looked out at the crowd, these hard, suspicious faces, and began. My name is Elira Crow. 4 months ago, I worked as a seamstress in the capital. I was good at my job. I supported myself. I hurt no one. Her voice was steady, clear. Marcus Reinhardt decided he wanted me. I said no. What happened next was systematic, calculated, and cruel. Reinhardt laughed. This is absurd. Let her finish, Nadine snapped. Elira continued. He fabricated charges, paid witnesses to lie, stole items from the shop where I worked and planted them in my room. When I went to the authorities, they believed him because he had money and family name, and I had neither. So I ran. I came here. And I married a man I didn't know because it was the only way to survive. A touching story, Reinhardt said smoothly. Also complete fiction. Miss Crow stole from my family's bank. Securities worth over $5,000. We have documentation, witness testimony, evidence of her guilt. This isn't about a rejected proposal. This is about theft. Show me the documentation, Rowan said. I beg your pardon? You claim you have evidence. Show it. Reinhardt's smile tightened. The evidence is with the territorial court. Convenient. So we're supposed to take your word? The warrant speaks for itself. The warrant, Elira said, was issued based on your testimony and the testimony of witnesses you paid. I know because one of them told me. A clerk named Thomas Vennick. He said you offered him $50 to claim he saw me in the vault. Reinhardt's expression flickered. That's a lie. Is it? Because Thomas Vennick worked at your father's bank, and he disappeared 3 weeks after giving his statement. Funny timing. The crowd was listening now, really listening. Reinhardt turned to Darrow. Marshal, this is theater. Arrest her, and let's be done with it. Not yet, Darrow said quietly. Reinhardt's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? I said not yet. I want to hear more. You have your orders, I have a warrant, but I also have discretion. Darrow looked at Elira. You claim Vennick recanted. Do you have proof? No, Elira admitted, because I left before I could get it. But there are others who know the truth. The owner of the dress shop where I worked, Madame Hollister. She saw Marcus coming around, saw him threatening me. She'll testify. She's 300 miles away, Reinhardt said. This is pointless. Then why are you here? Rowan asked quietly. Silence. You could have let Darrow handle this, Rowan continued. Could have stayed in the capital, let the law take its course. But you came all this way to watch her get arrested. Why? Reinhardt's face darkened. Because I wanted to see justice done. No, you wanted to make sure she couldn't talk. You wanted to watch her hang so she'd never have the chance to expose what you did. I did nothing. You're here because you're scared, Rowan said, his voice hard. Scared that if this goes to trial, if people start asking real questions, your lies fall apart. You're here to intimidate, to control the narrative. But it's not working. Reinhardt took a step forward, his composure cracking. You think these people care about the truth? You think they'll side with some disgraced seamstress over a respected family? You're delusional. Maybe, Rowan said. Or maybe you're the one who's delusional if you think you can buy everyone. The room erupted in noise, arguments, accusations, people taking sides. Darrow raised his hand. Quiet! The crowd settled, but the energy had shifted. Darrow looked at Reinhardt, then at Elira, then at the crowd. I need to speak with Mr. Reinhardt, he said, privately. Everyone stay here. He pulled Reinhardt outside. The room buzzed with speculation. Rowan kept his hand on Elira's arm, ready to pull her toward the back exit if this went bad. 5 minutes passed, then Darrow came back inside alone. Where's Reinhardt? Someone asked. Gone, Darrow said. He's heading back to the capital. Murmurs of confusion. Why? Nadine demanded. Darrow looked uncomfortable. Because I asked him some questions about his evidence, and his answers didn't add up. I'm not saying Miss Crow is innocent, but I'm also not convinced the warrant is solid. I'm recommending to the territorial court that this case be reviewed before any arrest is made. Alira's knees nearly buckled. "You're not taking her in," Greer said, sounding almost disappointed. "Not today. Maybe not at all, depending on what the review turns up." Darrow looked at Alira. "You'll need to stay available. No leaving the territory. But for now, you're free to go." The room exploded in noise again. Some cheering, some protesting, most just relieved the confrontation was over. Rowan pulled Alira toward the door. They made it outside before she started shaking. "We did it," she whispered. "Not yet. The review could still go against you." But Reinhardt left. He ran, because Darrow spooked him. That's good. But it's not over. Alira turned to face him, her eyes bright. "I know. But for the first time in months, I actually believe it might be." Rowan pulled her close, right there in the street, not caring who saw. "It will be," he said. "I promise." They rode back up the mountain as the sun set, painting the peaks gold and red, and for the first time since winter, the cold didn't feel quite so brutal. The relief lasted exactly 4 days. They fell back into their routines, trap lines, repairs, the endless work of keeping themselves alive in the mountains. But something had changed between them. The distance Rowan had maintained for months was gone, replaced by something neither of them had words for yet. They worked closer now, talked more freely, let their hands brush when passing tools or plates of food. On the 5th day, Calhoun arrived with news that shattered their fragile peace. "Reinhardt's dead," he said, standing in their doorway with snow melting off his coat. Rowan went very still. "What?" "Found 3 days ago in a boarding house outside the capital. Single gunshot to the head. They're calling it suicide." Alira's hand went to her mouth. "When?" Rowan asked. 2 days after he left Coldwater. Left a note, supposedly. Confessing to fabricating evidence, bribing witnesses, everything Alira said he did. Calhoun paused. "Convenient timing, don't you think?" "Too convenient." Rowan's mind was already working through the implications. Who found the body? Local constable, man named Garrett, works for Reinhardt's father. Of course he does. Rowan's jaw tightened. This wasn't suicide. Probably not, but try proving it. Alira sank into a chair, her face pale. His father did this. Had to be. Marcus failed, became a liability, so they cleaned up the mess. "That's my guess," Calhoun said. "Confessing and dying protects the family name better than a public trial would. And with Marcus gone, there's no one left to testify against you. The charges will likely disappear." "Likely," Rowan repeated. "Not definitely. Nothing's definite in this life. But Darrow sent word. The territorial court suspended the warrant pending investigation. With Reinhardt dead and a confession on record, there's no case to prosecute. You're clear." Alira should have felt relief. Instead, she felt sick. A man was dead. Maybe a terrible man. Maybe a man who'd tried to destroy her life, but dead nonetheless. And his death had been staged to look like justice while protecting the people who'd enabled him. "What do I do?" she asked quietly. Rowan crouched beside her chair. "You live. That's what you do. You survived this, same as you survived everything else. A man is dead because of me. A man is dead because he made choices that caught up with him. That's not on you. His family killed him to protect themselves. How is that justice?" "It's not," Rowan said bluntly. "But it's over. The warrant's gone, the charges are dropped, and you're free. Sometimes that's the best you get." Calhoun cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. Darrow wants to see you both. Says he has questions about the timeline, wants to close his report properly. He'll be in Coldwater for another week." "We'll go down tomorrow," Rowan said. After Calhoun left, Alira sat by the fire and stared at nothing. Rowan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I wanted him to face what he did," she said finally. "Not die. Not like this." "I know." "Does that make me weak?" "No. It makes you better than him." She leaned against Rowan's shoulder and he wrapped an arm around her. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. They rode down to Coldwater the next morning under skies that promised storms. Darrow met them at Nadine's boarding house, looking tired. He'd aged in the past week, new lines around his eyes, gray stubble on his jaw. "Miss Crow?" "Vex." He gestured to chairs. "Sit." They sat. Darrow pulled out a folder, laid it on the table between them. I need to ask you some questions, officially, for my report. All right, Elira said. When did you last see Marcus Reinhardt alive? At the town meeting, when he left with you. And after that? I went back up the mountain with Rowan. I haven't been down since. Darrow made a note. Did Reinhardt threaten you during the meeting? Not directly, but his presence was a threat. Did he make any statement suggesting he might harm himself? Elira almost laughed. No, Marcus wasn't the type to feel guilt, let alone act on it. That's what I thought. Darrow closed the folder. Off the record, I don't believe he killed himself either, but the confession is real. I verified the handwriting, had 3 people confirm it. Whatever else happened, he did write those words admitting what he did to you. Before or after someone put a gun to his head? Rowan asked. Can't prove which. The local investigation ruled it suicide, case closed. Darrow leaned back. But between us, I think his father decided a dead son who confessed was better than a living son who might talk under oath. The Reinhardts have significant political connections. This outcome protects them. And justice? Elira asked. Justice is complicated up here, Miss Crow. Sometimes you get it. Sometimes you just get to walk away alive. You're getting the latter. I'd take it. The warrant? Rowan asked. Officially withdrawn this morning. I'll file my final report stating the charges were based on fraudulent testimony and are no longer being pursued. You're clear. He looked at Elira. You're free. The word hung in the air like something fragile. Free. After months of running, hiding, waiting for the axe to fall. Free. Elira's hands shook. She pressed them flat against the table. Thank you, she managed. Darrow shook his head. Don't thank me. I was doing my job. You two did the hard part, standing up when most people would have run. He stood. I'll be heading back to the territorial capital in a few days. If you need anything, send word through Calhoun. He left them sitting at the table, the weight of everything finally settling. We should go, Rowan said quietly. But Elira didn't move. What is it? He asked. I don't know what to do now, she said. For months, everything I did was about survival, about staying ahead of the charges, staying alive. Now it's over, and I don't know what comes next. Rowan took her hand. We go home. We live. We figure out the rest as we go. Is that enough? It has to be. They walked out into the street where a light rain had started falling. Nadine caught them before they could mount their mules. Elira, she called. Wait! Elira turned. Nadine crossed the muddy street carrying a wrapped bundle. I wanted to give you this. It's not much, but... She handed over the package. Inside was fabric. Good fabric. The kind Elira used to work with in the capital. Silk, linen, wool in rich colors. Where did you get this? Elira asked, stunned. Had it stored away. Brought it up from Denver years ago. Kept meaning to do something with it. Never did. Nadine smiled faintly. Heard you were a seamstress. Thought maybe you'd want to get back to it. Town could use someone who knows how to make decent clothes that don't fall apart after one winter. Elira's throat tightened. I can't accept this. You can and you will. Consider it payment for making things interesting around here. Nadine's expression softened. You survived something that would have broken most people. Don't waste that. Build something worth keeping. Elira clutched the fabric to her chest. Thank you. Nadine nodded and walked back toward her boarding house, leaving Elira standing in the rain with the first real gift she'd received in years. Rowan watched her carefully. You want to stay in town? Set up a shop? No, Elira said immediately. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not now. Now I want to go home. Home. The words settled between them, solid and real. They rode back up the mountain through the rain, and when they reached the cabin, Elira spread the fabric out on the table like treasure. I could make curtains, she said, running her hands over the linen. Real ones, not just patched blankets. And maybe a proper coat for you, something that actually fits. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You miss it, the work. I do. I was good at it. She looked up. Would it bother you if I started sewing again? Why would it bother me? I don't know. Some men don't like their wives working. I'm not some men, and you're not some wife. He crossed to the table. If it makes you happy, do it. We've got time now. Might as well use it for something other than just surviving. That night, Elira cut her first pattern in months. A simple shirt for Rowan, measured by eye and memory. Her hands remembered the movements, the precise cuts, the way thread should pull through fabric. It felt like coming back to herself after being lost. Rowan watched her work, his expression unreadable. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" "About how you were right, back when you said we're not meant to live in complete silence." He paused. "I spent 5 years up here telling myself I didn't need anyone. That being alone was safer than risking attachment. Then you showed up and proved me wrong about everything." Elira set down her scissors. "Rowan." "Let me finish." He took a breath. "I know this started as a transaction. I know we both came into this broken and desperate, but somewhere along the way, it became real. You became real. And I need you to know that if you wanted to leave, if you wanted to go back to the capital now that you're clear, start over somewhere else. I wouldn't stop you. You're giving me an out? I'm giving you a choice. Same thing you never had with Reinhardt. Same thing you didn't really have when you married me. A real choice." Elira stood, crossed to where he stood. "You want to know what I choose? Yeah. This, you, the cabin, the mountains, the life we're building here." She took his hands. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go anymore. I'm staying because this is where I want to be." Something in Rowan's face cracked open. Relief, joy, fear all mixed together. "You're sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything." He pulled her close and they stood in the small cabin that had become a home, holding each other while the rain drummed on the roof and the fire crackled in the hearth. Spring arrived properly a week later, bringing green shoots and warmer air. The mountains transformed, ice melted into rushing streams, birds returned, and the world that had been hostile and white became vibrant with life. Rowan's traplines produced steady game, and Elira's garden, a small plot she'd cleared near the cabin, began to show the first signs of growth. They fell into a new rhythm, easier than before. Rowan still woke before dawn, still checked his lines and maintained their territory. But now he came back to a cabin where Elira had coffee waiting and conversation ready. She sewed in the afternoons, creating clothes for them both and taking commissions from settlers who heard through Calhoun that there was a skilled seamstress in the mountains. The work was different than in the capital, rougher, more practical, but honest. No one cared about her past. They cared whether she could reinforce a coat to last another winter or patch a tent that wouldn't leak. She was building a reputation, a new one, on her own terms. One afternoon in late April, Rowan came back from town with unusual news. "There's a territorial representative coming through next month," he said, "conducting a survey of settlements, looking at land claims and legal marriages." Elira looked up from the dress she was hemming. "Why?" "Territory's pushing for statehood. They want proper records, legitimate documentation. Judge Farrow's circuit certificates might not be enough." He paused. "We might need to register our marriage officially, with the territorial government." "Is that a problem?" "Could be. If they start asking questions about your past, about the charges were dropped. Darrow filed the paperwork." "I know, but bureaucracy has a way of catching up with people. I just wanted you to be prepared." Elira set down her sewing. "Do you think they'll try to invalidate our marriage?" "I think they might question it. Young woman, older man, quick ceremony in a frontier town, right after she fled criminal charges, even dropped charges. It looks suspicious." "What do we do?" Rowan sat across from her. "We tell the truth. We have nothing to hide. Our marriage is legal, it's real, and no one has grounds to challenge it." "You sound confident." "I am. We survived worse than a territorial bureaucrat with a clipboard." But when the representative arrived in Coldwater 6 weeks later, he brought more than a clipboard. His name was Fletcher, and he had a federal marshal with him. Not Darrow. Someone new. Someone who looked at Elira like she was a problem that needed solving. They'd come down to town to register officially, thinking it would be a simple process. Sign some papers, pay a fee, go home. Instead, they walked into an ambush. Fletcher sat behind a desk in the municipal office, files spread out in front of him. The new marshal, his nameplate read Williams, stood against the wall with his hand resting on his gun. "Mr. and Mrs. Vex," Fletcher said, gesturing to chairs. "Please, sit." They sat, but Rowan kept his hand near his own weapon. I've been reviewing your case, Fletcher continued, and I have some concerns. What concerns? Rowan asked. Your marriage certificate is dated February 7th. Mrs. Vex, arrived in Coldwater on February 5th. You were married 2 days after meeting. Is that correct? Yes, Rowan said. And at the time, Mrs. Vex was fleeing criminal charges in the capital. Charges that were later dropped due to a suicide confession from the accuser. That's right. Fletcher leaned back. You see my problem. This looks very much like a marriage of convenience designed to help Mrs. Vex evade arrest. The charges were false, Elira said. The confession proved that. Or the confession was coerced. We only have the word of a dead man. You have Marshal Darrow's report, Rowan said, his voice hard. He investigated. He cleared her. Marshal Darrow is no longer in this territory, and his report, while thorough, doesn't address the question of whether this marriage is legitimate or simply a legal shield. The room went very quiet. William shifted his weight, his hand still on his gun. What are you saying? Elira asked carefully. I'm saying that I have the authority to invalidate marriages entered into fraudulently. If I determine that this union was contracted solely to evade legal consequences, I can dissolve it, which would leave you, Mrs. Vex, without legal protection and potentially subject to renewed investigation. Rowan stood slowly. You threatening my wife? I'm explaining the law. No, you're overstepping. Our marriage is legal. Judge Farrow performed it. It's registered with the county, and we've been living as husband and wife for 4 months. You've got no grounds to challenge it. Fletcher pulled a document from his file. Actually, I do. Territorial Statute 612. Any marriage contracted during the commission of a crime or in furtherance of criminal activity can be annulled by territorial authority. The question is whether Mrs. Vex was committing a crime at the time of your marriage. She wasn't, Rowan said. The charges were dropped. Dropped, not proven false. There's a difference. The hell there is. Williams stepped forward. Mr. Vex, I'd advise you to watch your tone. Rowan turned on him. And I'd advise you to remember that you're in Coldwater, not the capital. People up here don't take kindly to federal overreach. Is that a threat? It's a fact. The door opened and Nadine walked in, followed by Calhoun and half a dozen townspeople, including, surprisingly, Greer. What's going on here? Nadine demanded. Fletcher looked annoyed. This is official business. This is harassment, Nadine interrupted. I watched these two get married. I've seen them live together, work together, build a life together. There's nothing fraudulent about it. Mrs. Kelter, with respect, your opinion isn't relevant to the legal question. Then whose opinion is? Yours? You wrote in here yesterday and think you understand this community better than the people who've lived here for decades? Greer stepped forward, and Rowan nearly fell over in shock. For once, I agree with Nadine, Greer said stiffly. I've got no love for Vex, but his marriage is legitimate. They live as man and wife. They work the land together. They've integrated into the community. You want to challenge that? You're going to have to go through all of us. Fletcher's expression darkened. I have the authority. You have authority over paperwork, Greer interrupted, not over people's lives. And if you try to break up a legitimate marriage just to make some bureaucratic point, you'll find yourself very unpopular very quickly. The other townspeople murmured agreement. Fletcher looked at Williams, who shrugged slightly. Fine, Fletcher said tightly. I'll approve the registration, but I'm noting in my report that there are irregularities. If those irregularities become relevant in the future, this marriage could still be subject to review. Note whatever you want, Rowan said. We're done here. He took Elira's hand and they walked out. The townspeople followed, leaving Fletcher and Williams alone in the office. Outside, Nadine caught up with them. You all right? She asked Elira. I think so. Thank you, all of you. Elira looked at Greer. Especially you. I know you didn't have to do that. Greer shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, well, might not like you much, Vex, but I like federal busybodies even less. Territory's trying to push statehood, and they're sending people like Fletcher to clean up what they see as frontier chaos. It's insulting. Still, Rowan said, I appreciate it. Greer nodded curtly and walked away. Calhoun grinned. Never thought I'd see the day Greer defended you. Neither did I, Rowan admitted. They rode back up the mountain in silence, both shaken. That night, lying in bed, Rowan had moved up to the loft weeks ago, and they'd stopped pretending to sleep separately. Alira turned to him. Do you think he'll come back, Fletcher? Maybe. Probably not. He got embarrassed today. Men like that don't like being challenged publicly. And if he does? Rowan pulled her closer. Then we deal with it, same as we dealt with everything else. I'm tired of dealing with things, Alira said quietly. I'm tired of fighting. I know, me too. When does it end? I don't know, but we're still here. That has to count for something. She pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. I love you, she said. The words came out without planning, without ceremony, just truth. Rowan went very still. Then his arms tightened around her. I love you too, he said roughly. Have for a while now, just didn't know how to say it. You just did. They held each other in the darkness, and outside the window, stars wheeled overhead like silent witnesses. The peace lasted through May and into June. Summer settled over the mountains, warm days, cool nights, the land bursting with life. Alira's garden flourished, her sewing business grew. Rowan's trapline stayed productive, and he'd even started talking about expanding their territory, maybe building a second structure for storage. They were planning, thinking ahead, living like people who had a future. Then Calhoun brought word that Marcus Reinhardt's father had died. Heart failure, according to the official report. Natural causes. But buried in the news was a detail that made Rowan's blood run cold. The Reinhardt estate was being liquidated, and part of that liquidation included settling all outstanding legal matters, including reopening the investigation into Marcus Reinhardt's death. They're saying it might not have been suicide after all, Calhoun explained. New evidence suggests foul play, and they're looking at everyone who had motive. Meaning Alira, Rowan said flatly. Meaning Alira. The theory is she might have had someone kill him in revenge for what he did to her. That's insane. She was up here. She has witnesses. I know that, you know that. But the new investigator, some ambitious prosecutor looking to make a name, he's building a case anyway. Alira sat down hard, her face pale. It never ends. It will, Rowan said. We'll fight this too. How? How many times do I have to prove I'm innocent? How many times do I have to run or fight or defend myself before they just leave me alone? Rowan crouched in front of her. As many times as it takes. I'm not letting them destroy you. Maybe you should, she said quietly. Maybe I'm more trouble than I'm worth. Don't! His voice was sharp. Don't say that. Don't even think it. Rowan, no. You listen to me. He took her hands. I have spent 5 years in these mountains alone, half dead inside, convinced that caring about anything was a mistake. Then you showed up, and you brought me back to life. You made me remember what it feels like to fight for something that matters. So don't tell me you're not worth it. You're worth everything. Alira's eyes filled with tears. What if we can't win this time? Then we go down fighting, together. She pulled him close, and they held each other while Calhoun quietly let himself out. The next morning, they started preparing for war. Rowan sent word to Darrow through every channel he could find, asking him to testify about the original investigation. Alira wrote to Madame Hollister in the capital, begging her to come forward with what she knew about Marcus's harassment. They documented everything, dates, locations, witnesses who could confirm Alira had been in the mountains when Marcus died. They built their defense piece by piece, knowing it might not be enough. 2 weeks later, the summons arrived. Alira was ordered to appear before a territorial grand jury to answer questions about Marcus Reinhardt's death. She had 30 days. We're not going, Rowan said immediately. We have to. No, we don't. We stay here. We fight if they come for you. But we don't walk into that courtroom and let them railroad you. If I don't go, they'll issue a warrant, a real one this time, and then we really will be fugitives. So we run, head north, cross into the next territory, start over. Alira shook her head. I'm done running. I ran from Marcus. I ran from the charges. I ran from everything. And it followed me anyway. This time, I face it. On my terms. You'll be walking into a trap. Maybe, but I'll be walking in with the truth, and with you beside me. That's more than I had last time. Rowan wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the cabin and refused to let her leave. But he saw the determination in her face and knew she was right. Running solved nothing. This had to end. All right, he said finally. We go. But we go prepared. And if it goes bad, we leave. No matter what they threaten, we get out. Agreed. They spent the next month gathering evidence, preparing testimony, calling in every favor they had. And when the day came to ride down to Coldwater to catch the coach to the territorial capital, half the town showed up to see them off. Nadine, Calhoun, even Greer, all of them there to witness, to show support, to make it clear that Elira and Rowan weren't alone. Bring her back safe, Nadine said, gripping Rowan's arm. I will, Rowan promised. They boarded the coach, and as it pulled away from Coldwater, Elira looked back at the mountains that had become her home. We'll come back, Rowan said, reading her thoughts. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to make it happen. She took his hand, and they rode toward the capital together, toward a courtroom and a jury, and one final confrontation with a past that refused to die. The mountains disappeared behind them, and the future, uncertain and dangerous, waited ahead. The capital looked exactly as Elira remembered. Crowded streets, buildings pressed too close together, the constant noise of commerce and conversation. But she wasn't the same person who'd fled 4 months ago. That woman had been scared, cornered, alone. This woman had survived a mountain winter and faced down armed men. This woman had someone standing beside her who wouldn't break. They found cheap lodging in a boarding house on the east side, far from the fashionable districts where people like the Reinhardts lived. Rowan paid for a week in advance, though they both hoped they wouldn't need it that long. The grand jury hearing was scheduled for 3 days away. We should find a lawyer, Elira said that first night, sitting on the narrow bed in their rented room. Can't afford one, Rowan said bluntly. Spent most of what we had getting here and paying for the room. Then what do? We tell the truth, same as we've been doing, and we hope it's enough. But the next morning brought a development neither of them expected. A knock on their door revealed a woman in her 50s, well-dressed but not ostentatious, carrying a leather satchel. Mrs. Vex? She asked. Yes, Elira said cautiously. My name is Catherine Marsh. I'm an attorney. May I come in? Rowan stepped forward, blocking the doorway slightly. Who sent you? No one sent me. I read about your case in the territorial reports. I'm here because I think you're getting railroaded, and I'd like to help. We can't pay you, Elira said. I'm not asking you to. I take cases pro bono when they interest me. This one interests me. Catherine's eyes were sharp, intelligent. May I? Rowan stepped aside. Catherine entered and set her satchel on the small table. I've reviewed the files. The original charges against you, the confession, Marcus Reinhardt's death, the new investigation. It's a mess of contradictions and convenient timing. That's putting it mildly, Rowan said. The prosecutor building the case against you is a man named Vincent Hale. He's young, ambitious, and he sees this as his ticket to higher office. A sensational murder trial, a beautiful defendant with a scandalous past, a mysterious death. It's perfect for headlines. Except I didn't kill anyone, Elira said. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. Hale is going to argue that you had motive, means, and opportunity. The motive is obvious, revenge for what Marcus did to you. The means, he'll claim you hired someone. The opportunity, he'll say you arranged it while you were in the mountains, far from suspicion. That's absurd, Rowan said. She had no money to hire anyone, no contacts in the capital, and no reason to risk everything when the charges against her had already been dropped. Logic doesn't always win trials, narrative does. And Hale's narrative is compelling. Wronged woman seeks revenge, stages a suicide confession, gets away with murder. Catherine opened her satchel and pulled out documents. But I think we can beat him. If we can prove 3 things. First, that Marcus's confession was genuine and obtained before his death. Second, that you were physically in Coldwater when he died. Third, that someone else had stronger motive to kill him. His father, Elira said immediately. Exactly. The elder Reinhardt had everything to lose if Marcus went to trial. His family's reputation, their business connections, their social standing, all of it would have been destroyed by a public airing of what Marcus did. Much cleaner to eliminate the problem and use the confession to close the book. Can you prove that? Rowan asked. Not easily, but I can create reasonable doubt. And in a grand jury hearing, that might be enough to prevent an indictment. Catherine looked at Elira. I need you to tell me everything, every detail, Every conversation, every piece of evidence you have, no matter how small. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Catherine was thorough, methodical, relentless. She grilled Elira on every aspect of her story, poked holes in her timeline, played devil's advocate until Elira wanted to scream. Then she did the same to Rowan, testing his testimony, looking for inconsistencies. "You're harder on us than the prosecutor will be," Rowan said after a particularly brutal session. "That's the point. I need to know where you're vulnerable so I can protect those areas. Hale is going to come at you hard. If there's a weakness, he'll find it." Catherine paused. "There's one more thing we need to discuss. Character witnesses." "We have people from Coldwater willing to testify," Elira said. "Nadine sent letters, Calhoun wrote a statement. Those help establish that you were in the mountains and living legitimately as Rowan's wife. But they don't speak to who you were before. I need someone from your life in the capital, someone who knew you when Marcus was harassing you, who can testify to your character and to his behavior." Elira's stomach sank. "Most people who knew me then believed Marcus's lies. They wouldn't help." "What about Madame Hollister? You said she witnessed his harassment." "I wrote to her. She never responded." "Then we find her and ask in person." The dress shop was in the merchant district, tucked between a bookbinder and a tobacco seller. Elira stood across the street, staring at the familiar storefront, her heart hammering. "You don't have to do this," Rowan said quietly. "Yes, I do." They crossed the street and entered. The shop looked smaller than Elira remembered. The same bolts of fabric lined the walls, the same work tables sat in the corner, but everything felt diminished somehow. Or maybe she'd just grown. A young woman Elira didn't recognize looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Madame Hollister." "She's in the back. Who should I say is calling?" "Elira Crow." The girl's eyes widened. She disappeared through the curtain. A moment later, Madame Hollister emerged. She'd aged in 4 months. New lines around her mouth, gray streaks in her hair, more pronounced. When she saw Elira, she stopped. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry. I need to talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about." "Please, just 5 minutes." Madame Hollister glanced at the young clerk. "Rebecca, take your lunch." The girl grabbed her shawl and left. Once they were alone, Madame Hollister turned to Elira. "You got my letter?" "I never received a letter. I sent it to general delivery in Coldwater. Maybe it didn't arrive." Madame Hollister sighed. "I wrote that I couldn't help you, that I was sorry, but my business was suffering enough from the scandal. I couldn't afford to testify." "Marcus is dead," Elira said. "And now they're trying to say I killed him. There's a grand jury hearing in 2 days. If I don't have someone who can testify to what really happened, to what he did to me, they're going to indict me for murder." Madame Hollister's face went pale. "Murder? That's insane." "That's the prosecutor's theory, that I hired someone to kill him in revenge. But you were in the mountains. Everyone knows that. They think I arranged it from there. I need you to tell the truth about what you saw, about Marcus coming here, threatening me, the things he said. It's the only way to establish motive for why his father might have killed him instead." Madame Hollister walked to the window, staring out at the street. "If I testify, I'm painting a target on my back. The Reinhardts still have power in this city, even with the father dead. Their connections, their business partners, they could destroy me." "They already destroyed me once," Elira said. "I'm asking you not to let them do it again." A long silence. Then Madame Hollister turned. "All right, I'll testify. But only because I watched Marcus terrorize you for weeks and I did nothing. I let you face it alone because I was scared. That was cowardice. I won't be a coward twice." Elira's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We might both regret this." Catherine met them outside the courthouse the morning of the hearing, carrying 2 additional witnesses she'd tracked down overnight, a bank clerk who'd seen Marcus forging documents, and a former maid from the Reinhardt household who'd quit after witnessing the father's violent temper. "It's not much," Catherine admitted, "but it's enough to create doubt." The grand jury room was smaller than Elira expected. Just a table, chairs for the jurors, and a witness stand. No judge, no audience, just the jury, the prosecutor, and whoever was testifying. Vincent Hale was exactly as Catherine described, young, polished, hungry. He shook Catherine's hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Marsh, I heard you'd taken this case. Interesting choice." "I find the innocent tend to make interesting clients." "We'll see about that." The proceedings began with Hale presenting his case to the jury, a narrative carefully constructed to make Alira look guilty. He called witnesses who testified to Marcus's death, to the timing of the confession, to Alira's presence in the territory when it happened. He submitted the suicide note, the coroner's report, everything that supported his theory. Then Catherine got her turn. She called Madame Hollister first. The older woman took the stand, her hands shaking slightly, and told the truth about Marcus's harassment, his threats, the way he'd systematically destroyed Alira's life when she rejected him, about the fabricated evidence, the paid witnesses, the cruelty of it all. "And in your professional opinion," Catherine asked, "was Miss Crow capable of the crimes Marcus Reinhardt accused her of?" "No," Madame Hollister said firmly. "She was honest, hardworking, and talented. Everything that happened to her was a lie designed to punish her for saying no to a powerful man." Hale cross-examined aggressively, trying to shake her testimony, but Madame Hollister held firm. Next came the bank clerk, who testified that he'd seen Marcus forging withdrawal slips and backdating documents, evidence that Marcus himself was engaged in fraud, not Alira. Then the maid, who described the elder Reinhardt's rages, his obsession with the family reputation, his statement that Marcus had become a liability that needed handling. With each witness, the narrative shifted. The wronged woman seeking revenge became a victim of systematic abuse. The suicide became suspicious. The protective father became a potential murderer. Finally, Catherine called Alira. Alira took the stand, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the preliminary questions. Catherine walked her through everything, meeting Marcus, rejecting him, the escalating harassment, the false charges, the flight to Coldwater, the marriage to Rowan. All of it laid bare in front of 12 strangers who would decide her fate. "Mrs. Vex," Catherine said, "did you kill Marcus Reinhardt?" "No." "Did you hire anyone to kill him?" "No." "Did you have any contact with him between the town meeting in Coldwater and his death?" "No. I was in the mountains. I have witnesses who can confirm that." "Why do you think you're being accused of his murder?" Alira took a breath. "Because it's easier to blame me than to investigate the truth. Marcus's death was convenient for his family. The confession protected their reputation while eliminating the person who could testify against them in court. I'm a seamstress from nowhere with no money and no power. I'm an easy scapegoat." "Thank you. No further questions." Hale stood for cross-examination, and Alira braced herself. "Mrs. Vex, you admit you hated Marcus Reinhardt." "I hated what he did to me." "Yes." "You wanted him to suffer for it." "I wanted him to face justice." "That's different." "Is it?" "You fled the capital to avoid charges. You married a stranger to gain legal protection. You publicly accused Marcus of crimes. And then, conveniently, he died before he could defend himself. He confessed before he died. That's not convenient. That's the truth finally coming out. Or it's a confession obtained under duress, forced by someone working on your behalf. I had no one working on my behalf. I had no money, no contacts, no means to arrange anything. I was 300 miles away, living in a cabin, trying to survive winter. Your timeline doesn't make sense. Doesn't it? You married Rowan Vex, a former soldier, a man with military training, a man capable of violence. Are you telling me he couldn't have made a trip to the capital without your knowledge? Rowan stood from where he'd been sitting. That's enough. Mr. Vex, sit down or you'll be removed, Hale said. You want to accuse me of murder, you do it to my face. The room erupted in noise. Catherine grabbed Rowan's arm, pulling him back down. The foreman of the grand jury called for order. When the room settled, Hale turned back to Alira. Did your husband kill Marcus Reinhardt? No. How can you be sure? Because I know him, and because he was with me the entire time. We were snowed in for weeks. Neither of us left the mountain. So you say. So I know. Hale studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. No further questions. Alira stepped down, her legs shaking. Catherine called Rowan next. He took the stand, his presence filling the small room. When Catherine asked him to confirm Alira's timeline, he did, calmly, clearly, with the kind of certainty that came from telling the truth. But when Hale cross-examined, he went for blood. "Mr. Vex, you're a trained killer, aren't you? I was a soldier. You've killed men. In war, yes. And you'd kill to protect your wife. If I had to, but I didn't have to, because she didn't do anything wrong. You expect this jury to believe that you, a man with the skills and experience to commit murder, just happened to be conveniently snowed in when Marcus Reinhardt died? I expect this jury to look at the evidence, which shows that I was exactly where I said I was, doing exactly what I said I was doing. Your case is built on speculation and bias. Mine is built on facts. Facts like a rushed marriage to a woman fleeing criminal charges. Facts like a marriage that's lasted 5 months and counting. Facts like a community of witnesses who'll testify were legitimate. Facts like the complete absence of any evidence connecting either of us to Marcus Reinhardt's death. Rowan leaned forward. You're trying to convict us because it makes a good story. But stories aren't evidence. Hale's jaw tightened. No further questions. The grand jury deliberated for 3 hours. Elira and Rowan sat in the hallway outside, waiting. Catherine paced, checking her watch, running through everything they'd said, looking for weaknesses. "We did everything we could," she said finally. "The rest is up to them." "What do you think they'll decide?" Elira asked. "Honestly, I don't know. We created reasonable doubt, but Hale's narrative is compelling. It depends on whether they're willing to look past the sensational and focus on the facts." The door opened. The foreman gestured them inside. The 12 jurors sat in their seats, faces unreadable. The foreman stood. "We've reached a decision. On the question of whether to indict Elira Vex for the murder of Marcus Reinhardt, we find insufficient evidence to proceed to trial." Elira's knees buckled. Rowan caught her. "However," the foreman continued, "we recommend that the territorial authorities investigate the circumstances of Marcus Reinhardt's death more thoroughly, particularly the role of the elder Reinhardt and his associates. It wasn't complete vindication, but it was enough. No indictment meant no trial. No trial meant freedom." Hale looked furious. "I'd like to request a review." "Your request is noted and denied," the foreman said. "This matter is closed." Catherine gripped Elira's shoulder. "It's over." Outside the courthouse, Elira stood in the afternoon sun and breathed. Just breathed. Free air, clean air. Air that didn't taste like fear. Rowan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Told you we'd fight like hell. We did more than fight. We won. You won. You stood up there and told the truth, and they believed you." Elira turned in his arms. "We won. Together." Catherine joined them on the courthouse steps, looking satisfied. "You two should get out of the Capitol before Hale tries something else. He's ambitious enough to be stupid." "We're leaving tonight," Rowan said. "Good. And Elira," Catherine handed her a card, "if you ever need legal help again, write to me. I meant what I said about taking interesting cases. Yours was fascinating." "I hope I never need a lawyer again," Elira said with feeling. Catherine laughed. "Fair enough. Good luck in the mountains." They spent their last night in the Capitol at the same cheap boarding house, but everything felt different now. The weight that had pressed on Elira for months was gone. The fear, the constant looking over her shoulder, the sense that at any moment everything would collapse. All of it lifted. "What do we do now?" she asked as they lay in the narrow bed. "We go home," Rowan said. "We rebuild. We live." "Just like that?" "Just like that." "It feels too simple." "Good things usually do?" She pressed closer to him. "I want to build something real. Not just survive. Actually build. A life. A home. Maybe eventually a family." Rowan went still. "A family? Is that crazy? After everything we've been through?" "No, it's the sanest thing you've said." He kissed her forehead. "But let's get through one thing at a time. First, we get home. Then we figure out the rest." "Deal." The coach ride back to Coldwater took 4 days. 4 days of cramped seats and bad food, and the slow transition from crowded cities to open frontier. 4 days of watching the world transform from civilized to wild. 4 days of heading home. When they finally arrived in Coldwater, it was late afternoon, and the town looked like something out of a dream after the chaos of the capital. Nadine was waiting at the general store. She took one look at Elira's face and smiled. "You won." "We won," Elira corrected. "Same thing. Come on, I've got food waiting at the boarding house. You can tell us everything." The town gathered that night. Not everyone, but enough. Nadine, Calhoun, even Greer showed up, though he stayed in the back and didn't say much. Elira told the story of the hearing, the testimony, the jury's decision. People cheered when she got to the part about the foreman's ruling. Someone opened a bottle of whiskey. Toasts were made. It felt like celebration, like vindication, like finally being believed. Late that night, Rowan and Elira rode up the mountain by moonlight. The cabin appeared through the trees exactly as they'd left it, solid, weathered, home. They unpacked in silence, both exhausted but content. "I was afraid we'd never see this place again," Elira said, running her hand along the table she'd sewn at so many times. "I wasn't going to let that happen. You can't control everything. No. But I can fight for what matters." He crossed to her. "And you matter. This matters. I wasn't losing it." She looked up at him, this hard, damaged man who'd learned to care again, who'd risked everything for someone he'd met as a transaction. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." They stood in their cabin, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd built together. The tools, the fabric, the small improvements and repairs that marked them as people who were staying. Outside, the mountain was quiet except for the wind through the pines. Inside, they were finally, truly home. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt earned rather than forced. Rowan worked his trap lines, but now he talked about his plans while he worked, where to expand, what to build, how to make their territory more sustainable. Elira took on more sewing commissions, her reputation spreading through the settlements. People rode up to the cabin with torn coats and worn-out boots, and she fixed them with the skills she'd honed in the capital. They were building something, not just surviving anymore, actually creating a life worth living. One evening in late July, Elira realized she'd missed her monthly cycle. She didn't say anything immediately. Waited another week to be sure, then another. By August, there was no doubt. She told Rowan on a Sunday morning after breakfast, with her heart in her throat. "I'm pregnant." He stared at her, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You're sure?" "Yes." He set down the cup very carefully. "How long?" 2 months, maybe, since before the trial. A dozen emotions crossed his face. Shock, fear, joy, terror. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "We're going to have a child," he said against her hair. "Yes." "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "You?" "Same." They stood in the kitchen, holding each other, facing a future that had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more precious. "We can do this," Rowan said finally. "We've survived everything else. We can survive this too." "It's not about surviving anymore," Elira said. "It's about living, really living." "Then we'll live, all three of us." She pulled back to look at him. "You're happy?" "I'm terrified and happy and completely unprepared. But yeah, I'm happy." She laughed, and it came out half-sob. "Good, because I am too." The pregnancy changed everything and nothing. Elira still worked, though Rowan hovered more than she liked. She still took commissions, still maintained the cabin, still refused to be treated like fragile glass. But they also prepared. Rowan built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth for weeks until there wasn't a single splinter. Elira sewed tiny clothes from fabric scraps, her hands remembering the patterns her own mother had used years ago. They talked about names, about how to child-proof a cabin that was barely adult-proof, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I don't know how to do this," Rowan admitted one night. "I never had a father worth emulating, and I've spent the last 5 years learning how to be alone. How do I teach someone to be human when I forgot how myself?" "You didn't forget," Elira said. "You just got hurt badly enough that you stopped trying, but you remembered with me. You'll remember with them too. What if I mess it up? Then we'll mess it up together, and we'll figure it out. That's what we do." He took her hand, pressed it against his chest so she could feel his heartbeat. "I'm going to try," he said, "to be the kind of father this kid deserves, to be better than I was. You already are. Fall arrived with golden leaves and crisp air. Alira's belly grew, making her movement slower but her determination stronger. She refused to stop working until Rowan finally convinced her that resting wasn't weakness, it was preparation. You're going to need your strength, he said. Let me handle the heavy work. I hate sitting still. I know, but humor me, please. So she sat and sewed and watched the world outside their window transform from summer green to autumn gold. And when the first snow fell in November, early and heavy, they both knew the baby would come soon. Too soon, as it turned out. The labor started on a night when the temperature dropped to near zero and the wind howled like something alive. Alira woke to pain lancing through her abdomen, sharp and unmistakable. Rowan! He was awake instantly. What's wrong? The baby. It's coming. He went pale. Now? It's too early. You're only 7 months. I know, but it's happening anyway. He scrambled out of bed, his mind racing through logistics. The midwife in Coldwater was a 3-hour ride away in good weather. In this storm, it might as well be on the moon. I'm going to get help, he said. There's no time, and you'll die in that storm before you make it halfway down the mountain. Then what do I do? Alira gripped his hand as another contraction hit. When it passed, she looked at him with forced calm. You deliver this baby. We've both seen births. You delivered a foal last spring. I helped with the difficult calving. It's not that different. That's completely different, Rowan. Her voice cut through his panic. I need you to focus. Can you do that? He took a shaking breath. Yes. Good. Get clean water boiling, get towels, get the medical kit, and then get back here because I need you. He moved, hands shaking but competent, gathering everything they'd need. The labor lasted 8 hours. 8 hours of Alira's screams, of Rowan's hands slick with blood and fear, of both of them fighting to bring a life into the world while the storm raged outside. Rowan had faced death before, had stood in battles where men died screaming, but nothing had prepared him for the terror of watching Alira labor, knowing that any mistake could kill her and the baby both. You're doing so good, he kept saying, his voice raw. Just a little more. Stay with me. Not planning to go anywhere, she gasped between contractions. When the baby finally came, tiny, purple, silent for one heart-stopping moment, Rowan's hands shook so badly he almost dropped her. Then she gasped and cried, and the sound was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever heard. It's a girl, Rowan said, his voice breaking. We have a daughter. Alira reached for the baby with trembling arms, and when Rowan placed their daughter against her chest, skin to skin, the world narrowed to just the three of them. The storm outside, the blood and mess and exhaustion. None of it mattered. They had a daughter, small, premature, but breathing, alive. She's perfect, Alira whispered. She's early. She's going to need constant care, warmth, feeding every 2 hours. Then that's what we'll do. Rowan cleaned them both, wrapped the baby in the softest blanket they had, stoked the fire until the cabin was almost too warm. Then he sat beside Alira on the bed, their daughter between them, and allowed himself to feel what he'd been holding back all night. Relief, joy, overwhelming, crushing love. We did it, he said. You did it. I just screamed a lot. He laughed, the sound half sob. You were incredible. I was terrified. Me too. Their daughter made a small sound, her tiny hand gripping Alira's finger. What do we name her? Alira asked. They'd discussed names for months, but never agreed on anything. Now, looking at their daughter's face, delicate features, dark hair already showing, eyes that would probably be gray like Rowan's, the right name came to both of them simultaneously. Hope, they said together. Because that's what she was. Hope that they could build something good from broken pieces. Hope that love could survive in harsh places. Hope that their future was more than just surviving. It was living. Rowan leaned down and kissed Alira's forehead. Welcome home, Hope. The storm blew itself out by morning. When dawn broke over the mountains, the world was white and clean and silent. Inside the cabin, a small family slept, exhausted, bloodied, but whole. And in the mountains that had tested them so harshly, In the wilderness that killed the weak, they had carved out something stronger than stone. A life, a love, a future. Together, the first 2 weeks were the hardest. Hope was too small, too fragile, her lungs not fully developed. She struggled to nurse, struggled to maintain her body heat, struggled with every breath. Alira and Rowan took shifts through the nights, one sleeping while the other watched, making sure Hope kept breathing, kept warm, kept fighting. Rowan had faced enemy soldiers without flinching, but watching his daughter struggle to survive broke something open in him that had been locked away for years. He'd sit with her for hours, her tiny body cradled against his chest, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "You're going to make it," he'd tell her. "You're a fighter, just like your mother. You didn't come this far to quit now." Alira watched him during those long nights and saw a different man than the one who'd written that cold, practical letter months ago. This man sang lullabies in a voice rough from disuse. This man cried when he thought no one was looking. This man had rediscovered something he'd thought the war had killed, the ability to hope for something beyond himself. By the 3rd week, Hope began to gain weight. Her breathing steadied. Her cries grew stronger. She was going to survive. "She's going to be stubborn," Alira said one morning, watching Hope refuse to sleep despite obvious exhaustion. "Look at her, fighting even when there's nothing to fight." "Wonder where she gets that from," Rowan said with a tired smile. "Definitely you. Definitely you." They both laughed, the sound worn thin by sleepless nights, but genuine. When Hope was a month old, Calhoun made his first visit since the birth, bringing supplies and news. "Heard you had a rough time of it," he said, looking at the baby sleeping in her cradle. "She's small." "She's getting stronger," Elira said defensively. "Didn't say she wasn't, just said she's small." Calhoun pulled a package from his satchel. "Nadine sent this. Baby clothes, blankets, some tonic that's supposed to help with colic. Also sent a message saying if you need anything, anything at all, you send word." "Tell her thank you," Alira said, emotion catching in her throat. "Tell her yourself when you come down to town. People are asking about you, want to meet the baby who was born in a blizzard in Surshemand." "We're not ready for visitors yet," Rowan said. "Figured. But when you are, know that you've got people who care. That counts for something up here." After Calhoun left, Alira looked at Rowan. "He's right. We can't hide up here forever." "I'm not hiding, I'm protecting." There's a difference between protecting and isolating. Hope's going to need more than just us. She's going to need a community. Rowan knew she was right, but the thought of taking his daughter down to cold water, exposing her to the cold, to people, to any risk at all, made his chest tight. "Not yet," he said. "Soon. But not yet." Winter deepened, but inside the cabin, life bloomed in small ways. Hope grew stronger each day. She learned to smile, to track movement with her eyes, to grip Rowan's finger with surprising strength. Alira healed from the difficult birth, though it left her weaker than she'd admit, and Rowan discovered that fatherhood was terrifying and exhausting and the best thing that had ever happened to him. They fell into new rhythms. Rowan still worked the trap lines, but now he worked faster, more efficiently, always aware that he had 2 people depending on him to come home safe. Alira sewed when Hope napped, her commissions piling up as word spread that she was accepting work again. Money was tight, tighter than before, but they managed. They always managed. One night in late December, Hope woke screaming with a fever that sent both parents into panic mode. Alira tried everything, cool cloths, warm baths, herbal teas, but the fever wouldn't break. Hope's small body burned like a furnace, and her cries grew weaker as the hours passed. "I'm going for the doctor," Rowan said, pulling on his coat. "It's past midnight, the storm—" "I don't care, she needs help. Rowan, you'll die out there. And she'll die if I don't go." They stared at each other across the cabin, both terrified, both knowing there were no good options. Then Hope's crying stopped. For one heart-stopping moment, silence. Then she gasped, a deep, shuddering breath, and started crying again. But different this time, stronger. Alira pressed her hand to Hope's forehead. "The fever's breaking." They spent the rest of the night watching her, neither willing to sleep, both afraid that if they looked away for even a moment, they'd lose her. By morning, Hope's temperature was normal. She nursed hungrily, her eyes bright and alert. She'd made it through another crisis. Rowan sat on the floor beside the cradle, his head in his hands. "I can't do this." he said quietly. Do what? Live in constant fear that she's going to die, that you're going to die, that everything I care about is going to be ripped away like it was before. Alira sat beside him, took his hand. You can't control everything. You can't protect us from every danger. That's not how life works. I know, but that doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. She squeezed his hand. But we're still here, all three of us, and we're going to keep fighting to stay here. That's all we can do. He pulled her close, and they sat together in the pale morning light, watching their daughter sleep, grateful for one more day. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought change. Alira had been feeling off for weeks, tired, nauseous, emotional. At first, she blamed it on the stress of caring for Hope, on the lingering effects of a difficult birth. Then she missed her cycle again. You're sure? Rowan asked when she told him. I'm sure. He sat down heavily. Hope's barely 6 months old. I know. We can barely manage one. How are we going to handle two? The same way we handle everything else, one crisis at a time. But even as she said it, Alira felt the weight of it. Another pregnancy, another birth, another fragile life depending on them to get everything right. Are you scared? Rowan asked. Terrified. You? Same. They looked at each other, and despite everything, they both smiled. We're going to need help this time, Alira said. Real help. From the midwife, from Nadine, from people who know what they're doing. I know. Which means we need to integrate more with the town. Build relationships. Stop living like we're the only people on this mountain. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. You're right. I've been keeping us isolated because it felt safer. But safe isn't the same as good. Hope deserves to grow up knowing people, being part of something bigger than just this cabin. And so do we. The next week, they made their first trip to Coldwater as a family. Hope was bundled in blankets, protected from the spring chill, her eyes wide as she took in the world beyond the cabin for the first time. Alira rode carefully, Rowan walking alongside to steady the mule, both of them hyper-aware of their precious cargo. When they arrived in town, people came out to see them. Nadine was first, rushing over with tears in her eyes. Let me see her. Let me see this miracle baby. Alira pulled back the blanket, and Hope blinked at the crowd with curious eyes. She's beautiful, Nadine breathed. Looks like both of you. Others gathered. Calhoun, some of the miners, settlers who'd heard the story of the couple who'd stood up to corruption and won. They offered congratulations, gifts, advice. Some just wanted to witness that Alira and Rowan were real, that their story had a happy ending. Even Greer appeared, standing at the edge of the crowd with an expression that might have been approval. You did good, Vex, he said gruffly. Both of you. It was the closest thing to a compliment Rowan had ever gotten from the man. That evening, they had dinner at Nadine's boarding house with a dozen townspeople, a celebration that felt overdue. People asked about the birth, about Hope's health, about their plans for the future. We're staying, Rowan said when someone asked if they'd ever consider moving somewhere easier. The mountains are home now. Even with winter being what it is, even with how hard it is to raise a family up there, especially because of that, Alira said. Hard doesn't mean wrong, and we've learned that we're stronger than we thought, both of us. Later, as they prepared to ride back up the mountain, Nadine pulled Alira aside. I heard you're expecting again, she said quietly. Word travels fast. Small town, and I've seen enough pregnant women to recognize the signs. Nadine's expression was serious. You almost died last time. You know that, right? I know. And you're doing it again anyway. What choice do I have? You always have a choice. But I'm not here to lecture. I'm here to offer help. When your time comes, you send for me. I'll come up and I'll bring the midwife. You're not doing this alone again. Alira's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just promise you'll let people help. You and Rowan, you've been fighting alone for so long, you forgot how to accept support. But you've got it now. Use it. The summer was different than any before it. Rowan and Alira opened their home to visitors, neighbors who needed help, travelers passing through, people from town who wanted to escape the heat and see the mountains. Their cabin became a hub of sorts, a place where people could stop, rest, share news. Hope thrived in the attention. She was crawling now, getting into everything, her personality emerging, stubborn, curious, fearless, just like her parents. And Elira's pregnancy progressed more smoothly than the first. Maybe because she wasn't running from anything this time. Maybe because she had Nadine checking on her monthly, the midwife giving advice, a whole community invested in her health. Or maybe because she'd learned that strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to ask for help. In late August, Darrow appeared at their cabin unannounced. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. "Marshal," Rowan said, hand moving instinctively toward his rifle. "Relax. I'm not here on official business." Darrow dismounted, nodded to Elira. "Mrs. Vex, heard you're expecting again. Congratulations." "Thank you. What brings you all the way up here?" "Wanted to tell you in person. The investigation into Marcus Reinhardt's death is officially closed. Ruled a suicide. The territorial court accepted it, and the case is sealed." "Why are you telling us this?" Rowan asked. "Because you deserve to hear it from someone who knows the truth. Marcus's father killed him. I know it. You know it. Everyone involved knows it. But we can't prove it, and with the elder Reinhardt dead too, there's no one left to prosecute." Darrow paused. "Justice doesn't always look the way we want it to. Sometimes the best you get is that the guilty don't get away clean. The Reinhardt family is ruined, their reputation destroyed, their business collapsed, their legacy reduced to scandal. That's not nothing." "It's not justice either," Elira said. "No, but it's closure. And sometimes that has to be enough." Darrow looked between them. "You two built something good here. Don't let the ghosts of what happened poison it. Live your lives, raise your children. Let that be your victory." He left as quietly as he'd come, and Elira stood on the porch watching him disappear down the trail. "Is he right?" she asked Rowan. "Can we really just let it go?" "We've been letting it go for months," Rowan said. "Every day we choose to be here, to build this life, we're letting go of what came before. Doesn't mean we forget. Just means we don't let it own us anymore." She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I like who we've become," she said softly. "Me too." The second baby came in October, on a crisp autumn morning with clear skies and golden light. This time, they were prepared. Nadine and the midwife arrived 2 days before the birth, setting up in the cabin, taking over with the kind of competent authority that let Elira relax. Hope stayed with Calhoun in town, giving them space to focus. The labor was faster, easier. Elira's body remembered what to do, and with skilled help, the complications that had nearly killed her the first time never materialized. When their son was born, healthy, strong, wailing with indignant fury, Rowan held him and felt something shift into place. His family. Complete. "What do we name him?" Elira asked, exhausted but smiling. They'd argued about names for weeks. Nothing felt right. But looking at his son's face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, Rowan knew. "Thomas," he said, "after my sergeant, the one who died in the ambush. He was a good man, the kind of man I want our son to become." Elira took the baby, studied his features. "Thomas Vex. It fits." Nadine brought Hope back the next day, and the toddler stared at her baby brother with suspicion. "Baby," Elira said, introducing them. "This is Thomas, your brother." Hope reached out a chubby hand, poked Thomas's cheek. He wailed. She laughed. "They're going to be trouble," Nadine predicted. "Good," Rowan said. "Trouble means they're alive." The years that followed were not easy. There were hard winters and failed harvests and illnesses that terrified them. There were arguments about money, about parenting, about whether they should stay in the mountains or move somewhere less isolated. There were moments when the weight of everything felt too heavy, when they both wondered if they'd made a mistake. But there were also mornings when Hope and Thomas would climb into bed with them, chattering about dreams and plans and the adventures they'd have when they were big. There were evenings around the fire with neighbors who'd become friends, sharing stories and laughter. There were quiet moments when Rowan would catch Elira's eye across the cabin and they'd remember what they'd survived to get here. The mountains shaped their children the way they'd shaped Rowan and Elira, made them tough, self-reliant, aware that the world didn't owe them anything, but it also gave them something precious, the knowledge that they came from people who'd fought for them, who'd chosen love when it would have been easier to choose safety. Hope grew into a girl who asked too many questions and took too many risks, who could track a deer at 6 and argued philosophy at 8. Thomas was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that rivaled his father's. Together, they were chaos and joy in equal measure. And Rowan and Elira learned that parenthood was less about having all the answers and more about showing up every day, even when you were tired and scared and had no idea what you were doing. On Hope's 5th birthday, the town threw a celebration. It had become tradition. Every year, Coldwater gathered to celebrate the girl who'd been born in a blizzard and survived. It was part birthday party, part community festival, an excuse for people to come together and remember that good things could happen even in hard places. Rowan stood at the edge of the gathering, watching his daughter run through the crowd with Thomas chasing after her, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the absence of struggle, there would always be struggle, but peace with who he was, with the choices he'd made, with the life he'd built. Elira found him there, slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How 5 years ago I was alone in these mountains, convinced that was how I'd die. And now I'm here, surrounded by people I care about, watching our children play. It doesn't seem real sometimes." "It's real. We made it real. We did." He turned to look at her. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here, marrying me, all of it?" "Never. Not once." She squeezed his hand. "Do you?" "Sending that letter was the best decision I ever made. Even if I thought I was just looking for help with the chores," she laughed. "You got a lot more than you bargained for." "Yeah, I did." They watched their children together, and Rowan thought about the man he'd been. Broken, isolated, convinced that attachment was weakness. That man would never have believed he could be happy, would never have believed he deserved to be. But here he was, happy. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but genuinely content with the life he'd built. Later that evening, after the celebration wound down and they'd put the exhausted children to bed, Elira and Rowan sat on their porch and watched the stars emerge. "I've been thinking," Elira said, "about expanding." "Expanding what?" "The cabin, our land. Maybe even starting a proper business, a trading post or a supply depot. Something that serves the community and gives us a steadier income." Rowan considered it. "That's ambitious." "We've done harder things." "True," he smiled. "All right, let's do it. But we do it together, and we do it smart. No taking on more than we can handle." "Agreed." They shook on it, sealing the deal the way they'd sealed every major decision since that first letter, with trust and partnership and the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. The following spring, they broke ground on an addition to the cabin. It took 6 months and help from half the town, but when it was finished, they had a proper storefront attached to their home. A place where travelers could buy supplies, where settlers could trade goods, where their children could learn the value of honest work. The business grew slowly but steadily. People trusted Rowan and Elira because they knew the couple's story, knew what they'd survived, knew they wouldn't cheat or shortchange anyone. And as the trading post thrived, so did Coldwater. The town that had once been suspicious and divided began to coalesce into a real community. People looked out for each other, helped during hard times, celebrated during good ones. Rowan and Elira weren't the only reason for the change, but they were part of it. Their story, of two broken people who'd found each other and built something worth keeping, gave others permission to hope. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Rowan gave Elira a gift. It was small, wrapped in cloth, nothing fancy. She unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal, the pages blank. "I know you used to keep notes about your sewing patterns," he said. "Thought maybe you'd want to start writing other things down too. Our story, the kids' stories, whatever you want." Elira ran her hand over the smooth leather. "Why now?" "Because I was thinking about Hope and Thomas, about what we'll tell them when they're older, about where they came from, how their mother was the bravest person I ever met, how their father learned to be human again." He paused. "I want them to know the truth, not some sanitized version. The real story, the fear, the fighting, the mistakes, because that's what made us who we are." That night, Elira opened the journal and wrote the first entry. She started with the letter, the cold, practical proposal that had changed everything. Then she wrote about the journey to Coldwater, the awkward first weeks, the slow building of trust. She wrote about Marcus Reinhardt and the trial, about Hope's birth and Thomas's arrival, about the community they'd built and the life they'd created. It took her weeks to get it all down, writing in stolen moments between running the trading post and raising children and managing a household. When she finished, she showed it to Rowan. He read it in one sitting, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "This is us," he said. "All of it. The good and the bad and the ugly. You didn't leave anything out." "Should I have?" "No, it's perfect because it's honest." He closed the journal carefully. "Thank you for writing it, and thank you for living it with me." "Where else was I going to go?" she said with a smile. "Anywhere. You could have gone anywhere. But you stayed. Because this is home, your home." They sat together in the cabin they'd built, surrounded by the evidence of their life. Children's toys scattered on the floor, Elira's sewing in the corner, Rowan's tools by the door, and felt the weight of what they'd accomplished. Not just survival, not just endurance, but a life worth living, built from broken pieces, earned through struggle, sustained by choice. Years passed. Hope grew into a young woman who worked the trap lines with her father and could navigate the mountains better than most grown men. She talked about becoming a surveyor, about mapping territories no one had charted yet, about adventures beyond the frontier. Thomas became an apprentice to the town's blacksmith, his quiet intensity finding outlet in the forge's heat and rhythm. He talked about building things, bridges, buildings, structures that would last. Both of them carried the mountains in their blood and the knowledge that they came from people who'd refused to quit. Rowan's hair went fully gray, and the old war wound in his leg bothered him more in winter. But he still worked, still provided, still protected what was his. Elira's hands, once soft from seamstress work, became permanently rough from frontier life. But they were skilled hands, capable hands, hands that had built a business and raised children and held together a family through impossible odds. They were not the same people who'd met in that cabin 10 years ago. They were better, harder, yes, more worn, but also more whole. On a summer evening when Hope was 16 and Thomas 14, the family sat around the dinner table, a tradition they'd maintained through all the years. Hope was talking about a trip she wanted to make to the territorial capital. Thomas was arguing about whether they should expand the forge at the trading post, and Elira was trying to mediate while Rowan just smiled and let his children debate. This, he thought, this is what I was fighting for without knowing it. Not just survival, not just peace, but this. The noise and chaos and messy beauty of a family that existed because two desperate people had taken a chance on each other. After dinner, Rowan and Elira walked outside, leaving the children to clean up. They stood on the porch they'd rebuilt 3 times, looking at the mountains that had tested them so thoroughly. "Do you think we did right by them?" Elira asked. "The kids?" "I think we did the best we could. That's all anyone can do. They're going to leave someday. Hope especially. You can see it in her eyes. She's got wanderlust." "I know, and we'll let her go. Because we didn't raise her to be safe. We raised her to be brave." "And Thomas?" "Thomas will stay. He's got roots deeper than he knows. But he'll build things. Good things. Things that last." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the peaks. "We made it," Elira said softly. "We did. Against all odds. Against everything that should have broken us." "We were already broken when we met," Rowan said. "That's why it worked. We didn't need each other to be perfect. We just needed each other to be real." She took his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after 10 years. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Simple words, but they carried the weight of everything. Every fight survived, every crisis weathered, every choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. The mountains stood eternal around them, indifferent to human struggle. But Rowan and Elira had learned that the mountains didn't need to care. They'd carved out their place anyway, built their life in defiance of the elements, raised their children to be strong in a world that demanded strength. And in doing so, they'd proven something important, that broken people could heal, that desperate choices could lead to genuine love, that hard places could become home if you were willing to fight for them. That survival was only the beginning. The real victory was in learning how to live. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, They went inside together. Their children were arguing about something trivial, voices rising in the way of siblings who loved each other enough to fight. The fire crackled in the hearth. The trading post ledgers sat on the table waiting for tomorrow's work. Everything was imperfect, messy, real. Everything was exactly as it should be. Rowan closed the door against the mountain night, and Alira began banking the fire for sleep, and their family settled into the rhythm they'd built together. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one small victory after another. The frontier was still harsh. Winter would still come. Life would still be hard. But they'd learned something that no amount of hardship could take away. That love, real love, the kind built on honesty and struggle and choice, was stronger than fear. That home wasn't a place. It was the people you chose to stand beside when everything else fell apart. And that sometimes, the best revenge against a world that tried to break you was simply refusing to stay broken. They'd started as a transaction, two strangers seeking shelter from different storms. They'd become a family, and in the mountains that had tested them so thoroughly, they'd found something worth more than survival. They'd found life, real, messy, beautiful life. And they'd fight to keep it for as long as they had breath. Together. Always together.